welcome back. My name is Brielle Newman, and on today's episode, we're going to be diving into literacy instruction for students with intellectual disabilities. So there's a really great article called 10 Research-Based Tips for Enhancing Literacy Instruction for Students with Intellectual Disability by Lemons and colleagues, and that is what we are going to be mainly discussing. So it makes a pretty powerful point that students with ID can achieve way more reading than people used to think if we teach it the right way. So the author gives 10 key tips, and so a few of those kind of look like keeping big picture goals in mind, so thinking long-term about independence and quality of life, then setting meaningful, measurable goals that actually connect to students' needs, and that instruction should be explicit and systematic. So focusing on things like phonics, decoding, fluency, and comprehension, and it also has to be pretty intense. So short, infrequent lessons don't really cut it. And another big one is language. So vocabulary and oral skills are the foundation for strong reading. And because of this, working memory can be a challenge. So teachers should scaffold, which that means to kind of like use visuals, repetition, and breaking tasks down. And they should also suggest targeting the most important skills in a clear sequence, using data to guide every adjustment. And finally, collaboration is huge. Teachers, specialists, and families all need to work together so that kids can get consistent support. So the bottom line is that with thoughtful, research-based instruction, students with intellectual disabilities can grow into very confident readers. So for the next portion of the podcast, we're going to dive into two main key practices. So what would those key practices that are recommended in the article to support student success look like? So the first one is to set meaningful, measurable goals. So a lot of you have probably done SMART goals before, whether that be for your personal development or in an academic setting. So instead of writing a pretty vague goal like improve reading, teachers and IEP teams should be using assessments to figure out a student's strengths and needs and then set very clear, trackable goals. So for example, a measurable goal would be by the end of the year, the student will read 90 words per minute with 95% accuracy. So the reason that is a SMART goal is because, for one, it has a clear was it reached or was it not reached? Can they do the task? It also has a timeline for when the task should be finished, which is by the end of the year. And not only that, it is measurable. So goals like these can make instruction more focused and progress a lot easier to track. And then the second key practice is to provide instruction with enough intensity to actually meet those goals. So instead of just kind of going along with whatever is happening right now for that particular student and hoping by the end of the year they can read at that level, there should be weekly, monthly, some sort of benchmarks to see if they're actually getting to the point that they need to get to, and if something should be changed. So the article explained that while inclusion is important, sometimes students with intellectual disabilities don't get the focused, direct instruction that they need if they're only in the general education classrooms. And while we always want the student to be in the LRE, the least restrictive environment, sometimes for them that can mean being in the gen ed classroom for most of the time, but having specific instruction outside of that, where it's a little more focused and it's smaller groups or just individual. So instead, they often benefit from daily small group or one-on-one instruction that directly targets their reading needs. So research shows that even 40 to 50 minutes a day focused phonics instruction can make a significant difference over time. So the big takeaway here is that instruction has to be consistent, targeted, and intensive enough to help students truly make progress. So for me, we had RTI time all throughout elementary school, and while I didn't necessarily have a problem with reading, I did have a problem with reading out loud, as I did have a speech impediment as a kid. So I would go into a room during RTI or specials, and I would have a speech pathologist, and she would help me with that. So, and it wasn't very restrictive, so it just kind of is student to student what's going to work best for them, and that instruction does need to be frequent and intensive. So for this portion of the podcast, we're going to talk about text-to-text connections. So this article also really connected well to the other course resources we have been using. So for example, Exceptional Lives by Turnbull and colleagues, that textbook emphasized the importance of writing high-quality, individualized IEP goals and making sure instruction is evidence-based and tailored to the student. So that directly ties into the article's recommendation to set meaningful, measurable goals and to provide intensive, focused instruction for students with disabilities. Both sources stress that when instruction is individualized and progress is closely monitored, students are much more likely to succeed. It also connects to the high leverage practices in special education article developed by the Council for Exceptional Children and the Cedar Center in 2019. So 2 of the HLPs are a perfect match for what the article discusses. One, using multiple sources of information to understand a student's strengths and needs, and providing explicit instruction, or intensive instruction. So the article's advice is to gather data from standardized tests, curriculum-based measures, and informal assessments that reflect the HLP emphasis on strong assessment practices. And it focuses on daily targeted reading instruction that aligns directly with the HLP that highlights the importance of providing intensive instruction. So overall, the article doesn't really just stand alone. It kind of just reinforces what we've already been learning in class across different course resources about the power of individualized goals, strong assessment, and evidence-based intensive research instruction for supporting students with disabilities. So for this portion of the podcast, we're going to be talking about text-to-world connections. So how does this connect to the real world? As future educators, the strategies in this article remind us that our job isn't just to teach, it's to make sure that every student has a fair chance to succeed. So setting meaningful, measurable goals helps us create clear roadmaps for our students, and we know what progress looks like and how to celebrate it. Providing instruction with enough intensity reminds us that some students, especially those with disabilities, need more than surface level support. They need time, they need consistency, and they need focused attention, just like a houseplant. So this is also where equity comes in. Some students may understand a lesson fully after just one class, while others may need several lessons and more practice to really grasp the content. So by tailoring instruction to meet those needs, we're putting every student on the same level playing field. In other words, measurable goals and intensive instruction help ensure that all students, not just the fastest learners, can access and master the material. Like whenever I was in elementary school, it was a lot easier for me to do reading comprehension, and I did really well in all of my English classes. But math was always a difficult area for me, especially whenever it hit 4th grade when we were learning about fractions. It was something that I just really struggled to grasp. So sometimes in my reading classes, since I did so well, my teachers would allow me during quiet time, instead of doing my individual reading, to work on my math assignments. And that was really helpful. And this does connect directly to promoting inclusion and culturally responsive practices. So when we individualize learning in this way, students with disabilities can be fully included with their peers while still getting the support that they personally need. So it helps us recognize each student's unique background, strengths, and challenges, which is what equitable and culturally responsive teaching is supposed to be about. So the big takeaway for this section is that using these practices creates classrooms that are more inclusive, equitable, and effective for every student. So for this portion of the podcast, we're going to talk about text-to-self connections. So one way that I already use these practices in my classroom is by having every student create SMART goals for themselves. Afterwards, we take those goals along with our own experiences with the students to plan the best ways to help them meet what they set out to achieve. We also adjust the intensity of instruction depending on what each student needs. For example, some of my kids pick up math really quickly, and instead of sitting through lessons that they've already mastered, they might work with an assistant in a side room to get extra practice in literacy or another subject that they're developing. Now, I do teach in a Montessori classroom, which does make this a lot easier, as we usually have a minimum of 3 teachers per classroom and we only have 15 kids in each class. So it does make it a lot easier for us to break up our groups like that, and Montessori is about individual learning plans anyway. But I do think that since I will be probably in a public school setting and I will be in a more than likely more traditional classroom where it'll be me with 30 kids, I'm hoping that I'm still able to use this, and while it may it will require more work on my end outside of my contract hours, I hope that I'm able to develop a system that still allows me to look at each student individually, see what their strengths are, what they need more work on, and individualize their learning a little bit more in regards to the state standards. So the same goes for spelling tests. Some students feel more comfortable listening to the teacher read the words and writing them down, while others prefer a one-on-one session where they say the words out loud to a teacher. So both options let the students demonstrate their knowledge in a way that works best for them. So to me, that's what equity and inclusion looks like, giving students choices and honoring their individual strengths. We learned about UDL, and I believe that the way that we have our Montessori classroom set up now is very in compliance with the Universal Design for Learning, because this is an actual example from my classroom. We do spelling tests every week with our first through third years, and we have a group of about 6 students who don't prefer to write it down. They would rather go into the side room, and they all have little clipboards, and we say the word out loud. They say it back to us as many times. They can ask it to hear it in a sentence, and then they write it down and we check it. So that's just another way of, I think it's expressing knowledge, that we try to make it a little bit more inclusive for everybody. And it's the same as this classroom. I am not the biggest fan of writing papers. I can do it, I just don't prefer to, as I really struggle to focus and I don't feel like I learn as much. But by allowing me to do these podcasts, I get a deeper dive into learning, and by thinking out loud and discussing these topics, I feel like they get ingrained into me more. And instead of it's just memorization, it's more of an actual learning process. And while I don't currently teach any students with disabilities, the article did change my thinking about how I would support them specifically. It reminded me that progress is not linear and learning looks different for everybody. Some students may need more time, patience, and measurable steps to reach their goals. But with consistent effort, they can get there. And as educators, it's our responsibility to make sure every student, disability or not, is learning in the way that best suits their needs and helps them reach their full potential. So, thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and bye for now.